which was what really is an industrial revolution. An industrial revolution is a moment in time, an epoch, a season in time of human history, right, where we as human beings are empowered through the tools and the methods of organizing human beings, their environment, and those tools to produce more with either the same amount of effort or less. All right. Hey, we're right back at it. Still on the matter of AI in Africa, the AI Africa that is supposed to bring $1.5 trillion by 2030. The AI Africa that is supposed to serve as the consolation for decades and centuries of poor development because of a whole range of topics, right? And so I've been thinking about that, really, really thinking about what, from a broader perspective, what this really is, right? So when we talk about artificial intelligence, when we talk about the fourth industrial revolution, what are we really saying? Like, what does it mean that there is an industrial revolution, right? So what are we really talking about when we bring that up as a conversation? When we say, "Oh, this is the fourth industrial revolution, is Africa going to catch up? Does it have what it takes? How do we capitalize on it? How do we stop a whole continent from being left behind?" Not just being left behind. The problem is not being left behind. The problem is not having the capacity ever again. And maybe that's stretching it. Maybe that's being like gloom and doom, but never having the capacity again, right, to set a population of the human species up for success or up for a life of dignity and prosperity, right? And the reason I really use that idea of contextualizing us as a human species is because I think oftentimes when we use these labels of, Asian or American, which is rightfully so, like those are national identities, right? Or you talk about, South American, like these different groupings based on continent. I think sometimes we get lost in we lose the perspective that at the core of it is the idea of humanity. And the lights just went off, and I'm gonna have to try to bring it back. Give me 1 second. All right. So we lose the core idea that like we are actively speaking about human beings, right? We are actively speaking about people. Backtrack. So when we, pair up into these national and continental identities and these groupings, which are, rightfully to be used, based on culture, based on geographic location, oftentimes based on economic standards too. That makes sense, right? But I think sometimes when we do that, we lose the very core of the very foundational idea of the fact that irrespective of whatever skin color, national identity, continental identity, all of that, irrespective of whatever those are, the core is that we are still a group of human beings, right? We are still a species of human who are in more or less ways experiencing the same tides of history, right? So tracking back to this idea of an industrial revolution, right? We have to first ask ourselves, what does that really mean for human beings? Like, what are we really saying when we say, "Oh, we're stepping into an industrial revolution"? And I really just understand it as this key point in history, right, where the human species stumbles upon, and I use that word "stumble upon," of course, it's years of research and very intelligent people, and subsequently, mechanisms to introduce it to the larger population. But yet, humanity in these little pockets of time stumbles onto, one, new tools, two, new ways of organizing human beings and their resources, right? When you think of the first industrial revolution, and this is really hard to speak about from an African perspective, only because, we were largely alienated from experiencing this historical human thing. I mean, other populations, Britain tried to keep it to themselves for most part of the first industrial revolution, but when we speak about like as a huge like as a set of the species, like a species, right? This set of human beings were alienated from participating in the first and second industrial revolution, and we'll speak about the third one in a bit. But the first industrial revolution wrote about, we have the coal and we have steam, and we have what really just starts. What has that's to happen is really just that the things that people would have otherwise used their hands to do, the ways people would have, um, the ways people, organized. So what really starts to happen with the industrial revolution is more so that, typically the things that we would have done just with our hands, for instance, creating textile, making that whole process of using your own hands to conduct that. I don't know how to do that. So this is just all from pictures and stories and articles. But typically what we experienced at that time was that we used our hands, two hands, to create the entire process, right? So let's say, for instance, it would take us 3 hours to create one piece of fabric. First industrial revolution comes in, and then people realize, hey, I can put this and this together, and to some degree this tool can take up a part of the work that otherwise my hands would have been doing, right? And so, there's the creation of the loom, and then let's say like in 3 hours when you are making one fabric, and this is such a very loose example, right? But it's just to give like context. So let's say like you were doing 3 different, let's say you were doing, so let's say you were doing 3 hours, one fabric, right? Now, Industrial Revolution comes about, we introduce the loom, and power by coal, power by steam, and so we introduce the loom, and let's say in like 3 hours you're doing about 6 of them. You are still participating in the process as a human being, but as a human being now, what has happened to you is that you have involved this new technology, right, that allows you to produce more with still the same amount of effort, and sometimes even less, and then the second industrial revolution runs about, and then we have electricity, we have the creation of the assembly line. Again, really hard to speak from the perspective of, to contextualize this from an African point of view, because we did experience these things. We did experience these new technologies and these new inventions, but it was never so much that we were, participants. I mean, we saw it, we experienced it through colonization. I'm speaking just on the continent right now. But we did these through the lens and the hands of others, right? We did this through the lens and the hands of colonizers. What it really is colonization, right? Colonization is the illegal control, right, of a people, of a group of people, of resources, of a territory. And so during this first industrial revolution, Africa was not a part of it, right? We didn't have the opportunity to experience it. We didn't have the opportunity to tailor it to our culture or our needs or our environment, which is very key as we move forward. Second industrial revolution rolls about. Towards the end, we are fighting for our lives, quite literally. And we go through a period where we are, gaining some, national freedom, quote unquote freedom. But we're gaining some national freedom. We are trying to fight from some political stability within our individual countries on the continent. And, while we hasten to talk about how we have not grown in many years, I think it's important for us to understand that this was just under a decade ago. Under a century ago. So for the most part, nations as they understand themselves as nations, right? Because you do know some of them were added together. Take Nigeria, for example. This region was added, the other one was added. Again, during that second industrial revolution, which we did not partake in, but we participated in. That's just a twist in words. It's just rubbish. Which we did not, and so that I phrase this clearly. So, which we did not, here's what I'll say. Which we did not participate in as owners, we participated in as I don't we didn't participate as owners. We participated as supporters. So we supported other people's industrial revolutions. Whatever technology was introduced into the country was not used. There's no necessary about it. It was not used to build the country or the continent. It was used as a means to siphon resources to build another country on another continent. And so we are stepping out of this, new industrial revolution, and during the years that lead up to the third industrial revolution, where we see computers and we see information technology, that is when we experience the most political instabilities in our nations. Because again, remember, we're stepping out of this, again, illegal control of the country. And so for the most part, every country, apart from Ethiopia to some degree, but for the most part, every country on the continent is young in understanding its identity, young in managing its own resources, young in leading its own people. And this is still happening in a situation where there are a lot of foreign interference. And so by the time the third industrial revolution rolls about, right, we are distracted. We lack infrastructure, because the years that we would have used to build those, what was already present was not created for economic integration in the countries, neither was it created for the education of the public or the people. So we don't have sufficient infrastructure due to that reason, and also due to the fact, again, there's political instability, there is corruption. Again, people do not understand themselves, they do not understand their people, they do not understand the concept of leadership, again, because we are such a young continent, in the idea of sort of waking up from this sleep of colonization. And so we have lack of infrastructure, we have political instability, so we do not have the traction or the power or the speed or the focus required to create the environment that would have allowed our people to take advantage of the internet, take advantage of the proliferation of computers, take advantage of the very idea of information technology, right? The very idea that now we have crawled into this digital space where man is not limited by their physical bodies anymore, which is such a huge concept when you think about it. So that happens as we're entering the third industrial revolution. It persists on. And here we are in the fourth, right? So when we talk about the fourth, we're really looking at, blockchain technology. We are looking at the Internet of Things. We are looking at artificial intelligence. And so just to bring it back to that first thing I talked about, which was what really is an industrial revolution. An industrial revolution is a moment in time, an epoch, a season in time of human history, right? Where we as human beings are empowered through the tools and the methods of organizing human beings, their environment, and those tools to produce more with either the same amount of effort or less, right? So it just means that our ability to multiply, our multiplying factor as human beings exponentially increases, right? So maybe during the Industrial Revolution, we are producing more and more, but we are still on the same playing ground, still using the same tools. We get to the next Industrial Revolution, our ability to produce goes up by power of 10, right? We get to the third one, it goes by the power of 100. We get to the fourth, it goes up by the power of 1,000, right? So these are moments when who we are and how we are able to express ourselves as a species is exponentially multiplied. All right, so now the question is, what happens, right, when a group of people, a set of human beings, as I would like to say it, what happens when they miss an industrial revolution? As Africa has, missed a couple, if not all of them, sometimes due to external factors, but other times due to internal factors as well. Well, the first one is economic impact. There's just stagnation and there's slow growth. because what has happened now is that the world has learned to use a new tool to meet a need, and because this set of people have not been able to learn to use that tool and have no access to that tool, they you can't serve, right? You don't have any value to bring to the table. If you have no value to bring, you have no expectation of a reward, right? So again, what that means in like the broader concept of economy is like you can't meet the demand. You have no supply to meet the demand. Therefore, you're not going to get paid, right? If you don't get paid, you can't have the money needed to gain the resources to train the people to meet the value or to create the infrastructure to meet the supply, to meet the demand. And again, it's just this perpetual cycle of poverty and stagnation and slow growth, right? The next thing is social impact. So what do we mean by poverty and inequality? So you're poor, again, no access to resources. What does that mean? No training, no education. What does that mean for the people? No ability to express themselves, right? No ability to utilize their thought, their hopes, their dreams, for the betterment of themselves, their family, and by extension their community. And so what you would then end up seeing is high crime rates. High crime rates, and just a further dissolution or devolution of society. And then political impact of missing an industrial revolution is if you cannot, again, as a person, and then as a group of people, then as a nation, and then as a continent, provide any value to the general welfare of the globe. Like if you have no quote unquote, and this happens for a lot of reasons, but I'm trying to simplify it, right? But if you have no value to bring to the table, you have nothing to trade and battle with, right? What that really just means is that you have no, what then that translates to on the global stage is that you have no influence, right? Because, money is the name of the game. If you have no money to bring to the table, if you have no value to bring to the table, you don't produce anything really of worth in terms of not necessarily being like a raw, like a natural resources producer, but you don't manufacture anything, you don't export, pertinent skills, you have no leverage, right? So when you have no leverage, you have no influence. And so then you are subjected to policies from international bodies, from nations, that will, and to their credence, to their not so, and that to nations and to their, justification, right? So you have nothing to bring, and international bodies, nations who have their own self-interest for their people, will take advantage of that, and that's something you can't really run away from. And so they will take advantage of you, creating opportunities for them to be in, to have the best, part of the deal, get the best piece of the cake, and perpetuate systems within your own country that, again, create cycles of poverty and inequality. And then when you miss an industrial revolution, you have to understand that every single season of growth is a ladder to another one, right? So once you miss one, then you've got to scale that one. Once you miss one, it means like, so every season is like every single revolution is like a ladder to the next, right? And so if you miss one of them, it means you've missed the technological skills and the access to the tools. So every single season is a ladder to the next one, right? So when you miss one of them, it just means you're behind. So now when the next one rolls about, not only do you have to catch up to that one, you have to catch up to the one you missed previously, which honestly I don't think is going to be the case for the fourth industrial revolution. I do think that we have an opportunity to leapfrog that. But what you understand, what I'm trying to say is there are very significant effects of missing a critical things like industrial revolutions. So, anyways, let's get deep into it, right? So, we are here in the fourth industrial revolution. Here we are, AI, artificial intelligence, which I am personally interested in, and a host of other technologies that are coming to the forefront. And the question in everyone's mind, and every question that people ask Bill Gates. I saw a video on LinkedIn, and a startup founder was asking him, does Africa have what it takes? And everyone is trying to figure out if Africa has what it takes, because for the most part, Africa still has the challenges that limited it from taking advantage of the third industrial revolution, right? So what are those challenges still? And in 2024, internet penetration in Africa is around 40%. Which is significantly lower than the global average of 66.2%. When it comes to electricity, about 640 million people, that's about over 40% of the population in Africa, have no access to electricity. They have no access to power. When you think about education, let's just talk about primary school, right? The completion rate for primary school on the continent in sub-Saharan Africa specifically 65% compared to a world average of 87%. The literacy rate for the ages of 15 to 24 is only 75% compared to 90% for other emerging markets in developing economics, not developed. When you think about the budget, even just the educational budget for African countries is about 3.5% of our our GDP as of 2020, and it's below the international, not even the standard international recommendation of at least 4%. This is not just to spout out metrics that hard to see, but it's to explain that we still have very significant limitations, right? Because when we talk about artificial intelligence, right, what are we really saying? So we're talking about the fact that you need internet, you need power, right, to power the data centers. You need the power, the electricity, you need the energy to meet the needs of cloud computing, right? You need the skills, right? They're not gonna run themselves, so you need a population that is trained to meet the needs of local business owners who are also trying to integrate AI into their ways of living and working. But if you don't have those, if you barely have decent literacy rates, right, that's a problem in of itself. So the point is that we're still limited for a host of reasons. And so the question in everyone's mind is, what can we do to get ahead? And people are there's digital training happening on the continent. There's an increased level of digital training. Literally now on every single 5 minutes of scrolling on an Instagram page, there's a digital training workshop happening in Nigeria, a digital training workshop happening in Kenya, which is great, right? So we're trying to bypass our formal educational system to provide the tools to teach the population, young and old, emphasis on young and old, because it's going to take everybody. And also now, one thing that we're also seeing is relatively influx of investments into tech organizations, fintech, agri-tech. We're seeing, influx of investments into that, which is great. While I think that's amazing, I do think that the question is it enough, right? I think it's decent. I think we can. So we're seeing investments into fintech and agri-tech. We're seeing, digital training, different workshops, different courses, things of that nature. And a slow inclusion of universities into this matter of artificial intelligence, particularly on the research front. And I think that's where we need to focus. Training for sure, investments for sure, but I think we really need to focus into research, because what the world has going for them is that now they have this opportunity to focus on the tool in front of the human. So they're focusing on the blockchain and they're focusing on the AI, which is great, the tooling of itself. And they're focusing on how to expand this tool, create more supercomputers. We only have one, by the way, on the continent. So they are focusing on a way to provide more of these tools, which is great, right? And which is the way to go. And the more you can provide, the more people can do with it. I don't think we have that advantage of providing the tools on such a large scale. I think what we need to focus on for the next 5 years is to invest in the people behind the tool. Um, I think that's what we sort of like follow India's path. So rather than trying to invest in the tool itself, um, invest in the people who are going to use the tool, invest in the people who understand the tool. I'm really thinking about research. I'm really thinking about investing in collaborative university programs. I mean, of course, investing in companies, creating the economic space where people take advantage of the tools would be great. I just don't think that we have the infrastructure available to make that. And I don't think we have the infrastructure available to see such a significant impact in the long term that will spell an equal level of prosperity, or a relatively equal level of prosperity for most people on the continent. However, I think if we do invest in research and training and education of the people, or if we do invest in that, then I think that what we have then done is empowered the continent to take advantage of its most profitable and unique characteristic, which is the youngest population on the globe. Not only can you invest those young people back into the continent, you can also export their skills out of the continent and then create the reservoir of wealth and resources to then create the infrastructure that would possibly, hopefully, prepare us for the fifth industrial revolution. That's a lot. I'm going to try to break this down more a bit. But those are my thoughts, still fleshing it out. You know, we this is interesting, like if just to be able to document this and to see this happen in real time.